first up today, we have Cauldron Energy Limited, ASX code CXU. Cauldron has a market cap of around 9 million. Cauldron Energy is a mineral exploration and resources development company focused on minerals supporting the clean energy transition. A warm welcome to Cauldron CEO, Jonathan Fisher. Jonathan, take it away.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back. Several times now I've done the Share Cafe. Always enjoy it. Look, if we could just go over to the first slide. Are we on this first slide at the moment? Can't see it. There we go. Perfect. Look, just on this slide, I'd like to just remind people, Cauldron's been around a long time, but we are a turnaround story. So if you haven't seen us in the last sort of 6 months, I'd recommend that you go back and have another look at what we're doing. New strategy, new assets, new team, new branding, and new everything else. And if you can see down there at the bottom, you can follow us on LinkedIn and not Twitter, what's it called now? X, where we keep investors up to date. So recommend you follow us there. Next slide, thanks. So the new team is Ian Mulholland, chairman. I want to point out, Ian is one of the few people who's won Explorer of the Year twice. Hardcore geo, hardcore explorer, extremely competent. And his Padawan is Angelo Socchio, our exploration manager. Angelo's last discovery was in lithium. Myself as the CEO and Mike Fry make up our corporate team, and that gives us a huge capacity to crank through new deal flow. And one of the things we are looking at is sorting out another asset. The other thing on this slide to note is over the last week, we've had a massive increase in our traded volume. In fact, we got a speeding ticket from the ASX on Monday. That was particularly frustrating at 30 million shares traded. They locked us down. I then responded. I wrote a 13-page treatise on why our volume was high. You know, what was so good, what's going on in the uranium markets, why are people so excited about our EM survey results. And then ASX came back and said, oh, geez, you can't write that. You can't respond to our question. So I'm actually really pleased. We had to put out something very benign, but I'm pleased here to get the opportunity to talk to you today, actually to run you through some of the excitement and why I think we're seeing a huge amount of volume in the stock, and there's been a bit of a share price movement too. Next slide. So current portfolio news is we got rid of the Blackwood Gold project over on the right there. Small sale brings in a bit of cash, allows us to deploy it in the focused areas. Melrose project in the West Yilgarn. We've just flown an EM survey on that, got some results pending. We'll talk about that. And then Yanri, which is our uranium exposure. Really interesting because we have the cheapest uranium pounds in the ground in a JORC resource basically globally. And with the uptick in uranium sentiment, investors are starting to have a look at that and realising that, you know, the uranium super cycle is going to go on for a while. It's going to go on for a lot longer than the Labor government in WA. And therefore, you know, they're thinking that we're a pretty good bet. We're also still looking at options to realise some value from the silica assets. Next slide, please. Okay, new strategy. In each of these 4 pillars, look, we're achieving things. We're selling assets, getting money to deploy across the other ones. We're doing some work on Yanri. I'll explain that. We're looking for more uranium, in fact, and we bought our first asset in nickel, which was Melrose. And I think that's what we're going to go on to next slide, please. One more. Okay, so guys, Melrose is fantastically located. It's only a few hours drive from Perth up the Great Northern, so it's very easy from a logistics perspective. There's accommodation and industrial facilities there. It is in the West Yilgarn. We are chasing Julimar style mineralisation. And what I'd say to any Chalice investors looking there, you know, 3 years ago, before Chalice discovered Julimar, well, we're kind of in the same boat now. So Chalice may have had a tough time after the release of the scoping study, but recommend you come over and have a look at what we're doing. We're following the same playbook, starting with Aeromag, EM, and some drilling as to what Chalice undertook. And we're really excited by the results we've got so far. So next slide. Look, this is just a photo of an old gold pit that sits in the middle of a tenement. It's actually excluded from our tenement. We think gold mineralisation does cross into our tenements, but we're not focusing on that. But that just shows you that, look, it is nice agricultural land out there, but you can mine. And Independence did a hell of a lot of drilling out in this area which we've got the benefit of getting all that data. Next slide. Out of that data, we've identified 4 priority targets. Next slide. Okay, and these are 2 of them. So what we started off with was 2-dimensional aeromag data. We were able to reinterpret that into 3D data, and 2 of these 3D shapes are shown here. The importance about that is basically these shapes are around 100 meters below surface. Now, why that's important is because we've got shallow historic drill holes that only go down to 50 meters. So for the first time, we were able to say that the drill hole results did not get into the anomaly, yet they were still grading 0.4% nickel. So if anyone knows anything about nickel, it's not particularly mobile. So if we've got 0.47% nickel straight above an anomaly, which we think, subject to our EM survey results, I'll get to on the next slide, that we think could be nickel sulfides, it's actually really, really exciting. And from an exploration perspective, it's a fantastic way to target our drilling. Next slide. So we flew our EM survey a couple of weeks ago. You can see the lines there in the map on the right. And the final data is to be delivered in the next few weeks. But I do want to just make this very point, and I'm not sure if anyone understands how EM surveys work. It's all electronic, obviously. It's on a chopper. We'll see some photos next. But you get preliminary data basically the night that you fly, the night after you fly. So you can actually look at preliminary data and you can adjust your plan for the next day. So what we were able to do is look at preliminary data and go, well, that's interesting. And we actually decided to get them to fly some extra lines, number 1, and number 2, fly some infill lines. So, you'd think that you'd only do that if there was something that looked pretty interesting. Now, we can't say anything more conclusive. We're not allowed to release the preliminary data. But the fact that we were pretty happy doing some extra lines and some infill lines to give some expectation that we're pretty excited about what's there. Next line. And by the way, we're not standing still. We're planning to drill, and we're planning to drill in November. So again, some indication that we're pretty excited about what's there and what's coming. Next slide. Here's the rig. You can see the EM on the right there taking off. That's a 34-meter diameter rig. It's the biggest one you can get on a chopper. Squirrel single engine there. Look, went off without a hitch. The guys at Geotech Airborne were fantastic, and just very pleased with the work they've done. Next slide. Also took the opportunity to go out into the community. Really important in that area. It's all green title, freehold title with the farmers. So if the farmers don't like you, you're not getting on their land. That's different to pastoral lease. And the guy down in the bottom right there is Paul Sutherland. That's it. Basically his land that we did a couple of those targets over. Beautiful part of the world, very supportive local community. And in the bottom left there, there's the CEO of the Shire as well. So the Shire themselves just very happy to have us in the town and spending some money. Next slide. All right, uranium. Here we go. Right, next slide. So, look, I live the uranium market every day, so investors may not understand this, but uranium is in an absolute bull market at the moment. It is incredible what you're seeing at the moment. A couple of things happened in the last week, and I think this has been a major driver of our volume. Spot's gone higher. It's gone 60, 360, heading towards 65. Sprott, which is a physical holder of uranium, is heading back to net asset value and then to a premium. They're looking like they may well start printing and therefore buying physical uranium. That takes more physical out of the spot market and makes it harder for utilities to get more physical, hence driving the price. Cameco, which is one of the world's largest producers, came out just before trading on Monday and informed the market that they were short. So their production is short 2.7 million pounds for this year. And not only that, because of the way the contracts work, they were actually going to have to buy in the spot market to cover their delivery contracts. So that kind of put a bit of a rocket through the uranium sector and really highlights, the demand side. WNA is going on in London at the moment. That's the World Nuclear Association annual conference. There's a lot of talk there about the supply side response being weak. So pricing hasn't yet got to what you call incentive pricing to drive a significant amount of new supply into the market, and that's causing a lot of concern for people. There's a couple of quotes here from some uranium industry legends saying, look, the conditions in uranium have never been better, number one, and number two, they are not changing anytime soon. Obviously, Russia and Nigeria and other sort of geopolitical concerns means that people that can produce in really friendly countries like Australia are very much interested in the investment community at the moment. Next slide. So we've got a fantastic uranium asset, but it's in WA. So it is ISL leachable. It is cheap to develop. It is cheap to operate. It is bloody big, world scale. But right now, we're constrained to what we can do about it. So next slide. ISL is the way to do these developments. If your asset is ISL leachable, you'll make money out of it. And Yanri, our one, is very similar to the Boss asset in South Australia, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Next slide. So our next slide, look, we've got a big resource. These slides are all for everyone's benefit that they can review later. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have a POW now approved by DEMAs to drill out that resource further, and we intend on expanding the resource. Look, 6 months ago, the market probably didn't want us to do that because of the uranium policy in WA, but now we're getting feedback the market is interested to increase that resource because of the interest from the uranium spot market, but secondly, because of what's happening in WA and Australia with respect to uranium and nuclear. And, a change in policy might be a bit sooner than people think. And we'll talk about that next slide. So, right, Australia is half pregnant right now in nuclear. We have decided to buy a fleet of small modular reactors in the form of nuclear submarines. We've then decided to home port half of them in Western Australia. And the Western Australian government is super happy about having 3 nuclear reactors sitting off the coast of Perth, yet their current policy won't let you mine uranium in the state, which is just ridiculous and hypocritical. It's going to change, and this half pregnant situation won't last. So for uranium mining, that is a state-based issue. And I'm actually going to call out a comment I just saw on Hot Copper around, I made a comment here about sports bet odds. It's really interesting to see when Mr. McGowan was in power, the change in government sports bet odds were 14-1. The day he left power, it went to 9-1. And then after the ridiculous kind of heritage laws debacle in WA, it's reduced further. It's now at about 4-1. So it's come in from 14-1 to 4-1. And it's continuing to move. In fact, there were polls released in the West that said if an election was held 2 weeks ago, the Liberals would have won. The second thing to note is the Liberals in WA are pro-uranium mining. I've had that straight from the horse's mouth. The day that they are back in power, that policy changes. Question is, will it be an election issue? And I can just highlight, we're going to release some polling. It has been released to us next week, which shows from the WA public's perspective how unpopular this policy is. And there's 2 things there. Obviously, most Liberal voters are against the policy, but the polling shows that 50% of Labor voters don't agree with the policy. And actually 33% of Greens voters don't agree with the policy either. So with that level of I guess a lack of support for that policy, I could expect that it may well become an election issue. Federally, civilian nuclear generation is an election issue. Mr. Dutton has made it that way. There is a lot of criticism and concern around the Labor renewables-led policy, what it'll mean for power prices and grid stability. And we'll see how that develops and then feeds into uranium mining. But you can see it in the media, you can see it in the level of discussion, and you can see it in the level of investor interest in uranium stocks in Australia. It's really hot right now. Next slide. Okay, so what are we doing? We're getting our EM results soon, and we're going to drill at Melrose. And we are chasing nickel. We're chasing nickel like a Julimar style deposit. We're very excited about that. At Yanri, we have a drill program approved. We will drill that in due course. And secondly, we're doing a field program there to check for some other commodities like rare earths that we think the tenements, especially down in the south, could be attractive for. We've also sold Blackwood. We're looking at selling our sand assets and we're looking for some new projects. I've got one more slide, Manny. Next slide. Okay, and here's the peer comparison. We are cheap. We are assuming no value for any other projects, we're less than 20 cents a pound for you. Compared to Boss, on the other side, which is about $18 a pound. Now, the reason that's similar is, look, actually both projects are Paleo Channel, both are about 100 metres deep. Both are ISL leachable, both are similar size. They're in a jurisdiction that they can develop their asset. In fact, they've done that, spent $100 million. We can't. But it does demonstrate where we can get to in the next few years as that policy changes. There's a huge amount of uplift in that price simply on uranium, and then we've got the exciting nickel prospects to go. So really exciting future. You can see a re-rate coming for Cauldron, and you can actually see a huge amount of volume coming through, and it's just great to get the liquidity in the stock. I think that's it. The final thing is my personal email address is on this next slide, and actually on every single announcement is my personal mobile number. Anyone can call me, anyone can email me. Look, the company had a bit of a bad history of prior shareholder engagement, and it was kind of terrible. So I'm trying to be the most open and responsive and transparent CEO for a junior stock out there. Give me a buzz, send me an email, let's talk. Happy to talk through anything without wall crossing you. Okay, thanks, Manny.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. There are a few questions coming through for you.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll give you the first one, which has come through on a couple of questions. Essentially, the question is: are you a little bit disappointed that the stock, given what the uranium price has done, you haven't re-rated yet, whereas perhaps others have seen good, sort of good movements in share prices? Are you a little bit disappointed and a little bit surprised it hasn't?
Look, we're up 30% yesterday, back down 10% today. I think I've been really getting the marketing out there and hitting Twitter and LinkedIn, especially after I got my teenage daughter to teach me how to use Twitter. Really pushing the story around how cheap our U pounds are, and I think investors, because of the prior history of the company, it had been 5 years of not great stuff. People are only just starting to rediscover the story. You're seeing that in the volume in the last week. It's been phenomenal. And I think there's only upside from here. Okay,
great. Another question that's come through is a question around some timing and timeline. You've mentioned the EM survey at Melrose. When can we expect to see some of those results coming through?
Yeah, so we want to get we've got preliminary data. Obviously, the final data will come through from Canada actually in the coming days. But then it takes a week to sort of, interpret and get the geeks to do the number crunching. So, we've said in the next 4 weeks. I hope it will be sooner. And then the next step after that is drilling. We will be drilling as soon as the harvest is finished on that land. And look, unfortunately for the farmers, it's not a great season this year. They've had 2 very good seasons, but they'll do an early harvest this year. So I expect we'll be drilling late November, early December.
Okay, great. And one final question for you, and this one's around funding and the balance sheet. Just a question around, how comfortable are you given the current status of the balance sheet, and is it, are you in a position to basically fund all the plans that you do have?
Yeah, so it was one of the nice things about selling the Blackwood Gold asset recently, get a bit of money in the door. Could have sold that, for scrip or some, more production royalties and stuff. I just wanted cash to boost that position. We've also got a bit more cash coming in the door. We let some tenement applications go actually in WA recently, and we get about 50 grand back from that. So, all that helps. But, the cash is getting lower. The drill campaign at Melrose is not going to be an expensive one because it's not large, it's not deep. It's very simple to get to, so mob and demob is okay. So, the question is, do you drill and the current funding envelope, or do we look to raise? But I think, we've got some options there. The asset that we're looking to sell, still a sand asset, would be a more valuable asset than the gold asset, and so that could well bring some funding in the door. But we're doing pretty well. Pretty happy where we are.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan.